found that you could trade a quart of Canadian maple syrup for a quart of U.S. maple syrup or Vermont maple syrup, one for one, after factoring in the nominal exchange rate. And so I said that that is an example of purchasing power parity, which is abbreviated PPP. That stands for purchasing power parity. And what purchasing power parity means is that a good should cost the same price no matter where in the world it's purchased. It should. Um, to explain why it should, let's think for just a minute what would happen if it didn't. And the maple syrup example is a case where this could be done, I think, pretty easily. Maple syrup, you get these little jars of maple syrup in gift shops, of course, in grocery stores, but gift shops, even like card stores, will often sell maple syrup. Certainly, gift shops around any kind of touristy area. Like I live in Annapolis, but I'm not downtown. I live in the zip code. But if you go to downtown Annapolis, I mean, these T-shirt shops will sell Vermont maple syrup because people will come from other countries and stuff, and so it's something that people buy, and so it's a fairly broad market. Like if you were in the wholesale maple syrup business, you could probably get your maple syrup from a different source and sell it to these shops and these outlets pretty easily, switching your source of maple syrup, it seems to me. And I think that's why we found the real exchange rate to be 1. Because let's suppose it wasn't 1. Let's suppose when we did that arithmetic that we did to find the real exchange rate, you could have purchased, I don't know, just say 50% more maple syrup in Canada for $1 if you went and got Canadian dollars and made your purchases. There's no firm restrictions on the importation of maple syrup, and it's very easy for Canadian and U.S. citizens to cross our borders back and forth. I've been to Canada a number of times. It's not a hard thing to do. Like I said, it's not hard to put this maple syrup from different sources on the shelves at the places that sell maple syrup. If you look around, it's true. I know because I love maple syrup. I pay close attention to maple syrup. In my trips to Canada, I have bought maple syrup and maple syrup derivatives like the little sugars, the little sugar candies. They're delightful. Well, someone like me, if you could get Canadian maple syrup, if you could get 50% more in Canada for $1 just by exchanging your currency, people like me who maybe live close to the border, it would be like a side business, right? You could just on a Saturday drive up to Canada, exchange your currency, and you'd find the place that would charge you the least amount of a bit that they take off that I told you about. You could exchange your currency, you could load up the back of your pickup with maple syrup, and then bring it down to the U.S. and resell it at the U.S. price, or maybe even just undercut the U.S. price a little bit to be able to get into those stores and get your maple syrup to be the one on the shelves. And you would have a very high profit margin. The only cost would be the transportation costs of bringing it in. So as long as that difference in the real exchange rate exceeded the transportation costs and the value of your time, you'd be making a lot of money very easily, like that. That's called an arbitrage opportunity. An arbitrage opportunity. This is a term that's in italics in the textbook. It's not highlighted, probably not highlighted enough because it helps to make sense of this stuff, I think. Arbitrage is spelled ARBITRAGE. ARBITRAGE. Arbitrage opportunity. That's where you can buy something low and turn it right around and sell it high. And economists expect that arbitrage opportunities, when they exist, will be very short-lived. Let's think about why that would be short-lived. If people like me could spend their Saturdays loading up their pickup truck with maple syrup in Canada, bringing it down into the U.S. and reselling it in the U.S., or selling it in the U.S., not reselling it, selling it in the U.S., let's think about what that does to the supply and demand for maple syrup on both sides of that border. A lot of people here, you can make money doing this, or they see this, they go up there, they start buying Canadian maple syrup. What's that do to the demand for maple syrup in Canada? It increases the demand for maple syrup in Canada. So all else held constant, when the demand for something increases, what's that do to its price? It increases its price. Well, if they're doing that, then they're not buying the Vermont maple syrup in the United States as much. So that means the demand for the Vermont maple syrup is down. So when demand goes down for a good, all else held constant, what does that do to its price? That lowers its price. So now you have the US price falling and the Canadian price rising. Well, remember, the whole point of doing this was because it was cheaper in Canada, but you're putting upward pressure on that price, and you're bringing up the price. I'm sorry, you're lowering the price of the thing it's competitive with, the U.S. market, the U.S. maple syrup. So where would we expect the prices to end up? We would expect them to end up right where they actually are, with the little sample I found of 2 online retailers at 1-to-1. The arbitrage opportunity would go away because it's just not that hard to do. It's even easier to just switch currencies and to buy and sell financial instruments if there's a difference in the real exchange rate across goods. We only looked at just one simple good from one simple from two retailers that I found online, giving it 20 minutes, half hour searching. So because of the possibility of an arbitrage opportunity, that's why we would expect purchasing power to be the case. And in the case of the Canadian maple syrup versus the U.S. maple syrup, it was the case. And I think that's probably because there are a lot of people who hop back and back and forth across the Canadian border. And like I said, the gift shops and the places that sell that stuff, they would hype Canadian maple syrup instead of hyping Vermont maple syrup if it was profitable to do so. They would just put that on their tag and say, oh, it's the best this week. As someone who loves maple syrup, I can tell you I love it all, and I have no issue with foreign maple syrup. It's also just as delightful as domestic maple syrup and vice versa. They are good substitutes. So that gets me to some problems with purchasing power parity. One is that maybe things aren't such good substitutes. Economists don't like to believe in qualitative differences, but consumers sure do. So if consumers or anyone watching this going, no way, man, Vermont maple syrup's way better, that could drive a price difference if a lot of people feel that way. That would be a perceived difference in quality, and that would make the Canadian maple syrup not a perfect substitute for the Vermont maple syrup. So that's one thing that gets in the way. And then, of course, another thing that gets in the way could be the costs of transporting the good. If it's not feasible to bring that across, then that purchasing power parity isn't likely to happen. And very similar to that, not all goods and services are transportable at all. Some services can be done via the internet or the phone or something like that, but things like, a haircut, a manicure, whatever, things like these kinds of services, you can't really transfer them across a border. What can happen is that somebody traveling can look around and go, oh, look how they do that up here. This is cool. I'm going to go start a business back home and do this, and imitate what they do. So in that sense, services are transportable, but that might take some more time for that to happen, for the supply to rise on one side of a border and the demand to fall on another side of the border, because services just aren't that portable. So those are the things that get in the way. And the outcome of them getting in the way is very real. In my notes, if you look, I have a link, I have a hyperlink. I don't have a way to hyperlink to my words in a video, but I do in my notes to what's called the Big Mac Index. There's a newspaper called The Economist. It's a British newspaper. And since 1986, they've been tracking the price of a Big Mac around the world, because a Big Mac is a Big Mac is a Big Mac, right? McDonald's insists on having the same quality standard for their Big Mac. and McDonald's exists all over the world. So it's a perfectly substitutable product. A Big Mac in Australia should in all ways be identical to a Big Mac in Baltimore. And based on what we're saying, once you did your currency exchange, it should cost the same amount in Australia as it does in Baltimore. Again, nobody's going to transport a Big Mac. Nobody's going to load up pickup trucks of Big Macs and bring it across the border to resell them. So it's just kind of a representative good. And if the real exchange rate were not in purchasing power parity, it would mean that you could take advantage of that and buy other things, financial assets in that economy. So the outcome of the Big Mac index is that we don't really achieve purchasing power parity. There's a pretty wide range of prices on the Big Mac around the world. I think if you click on that link, you would see The Economist right now talks about how undervalued the British pound is, right on the headline that they have on based on the values of the Big Mac index. So that's what purchasing power is, purchasing power parity, that's what it is, and that's what gets in the way of it, and that's the way it comes out in the real world. So that's all I have. Have a good day.